Good evening. I've changed the title a bit. It's called From the Sea. I will first show you a interesting picture. What do you all see? It is a very old trick image whereby you either see an old lady or a young girl. Now, if you see a young girl, then you should look at her chin and think of it as a large nose of an old lady. If you see an old woman, then you look at her nose and imagine as the chin or the cheek of a young girl looking away from you. Why do I bring this up? We all look at the same thing and we can come to different views. And of course, when you have different views, it can lead to war. For instance, many people think of Trump as crazy or mad, or he's a taco, or he always chicken out. And the longer he remains in the White House, he will lead us to World War III. I think maybe 80-90% of people whom I've come across think that he's really crazy. Today, I will show you another view of Trump as a person who wants to bring peace to the world. These are my views, and it does not represent the views of all those that I'm associated with. Okay, let's start with, before Trump came along, right? There's this group of people who are still around, neocons, and they have one aim for the US empire, which is that the US should always be number one. When I talk about US empire, the G7 and all the NATO countries. The idea of neocon is very simple. They want to continue to dominate the world. In fact, the neocon is an offshoot of the end of the Second World War. Basically, you want to gain power over others, either through colonialization or you impose on them by military means or economic dominance. Now, let's look at it from an economics point of view. Globalism, global factors of production, and imperialism. Let's look at land. Who has the most land? Russia. And who has got the most abundant resources? Russia as well. $75 trillion worth of it. And of course, there was a golden period for Western companies, which was after the fall of USSR, whereby they all went to Russia and exploited. Of course, they created a class of oligarchs, Russian oligarchs, but basically they exploited Russian resources. Now we look further to labor. Who has abundant labor? Of course, it's China. Between 1978, when they opened up to the world, and maybe up to 5 to 10 years ago, where labor was cheap and they were very hardworking and efficient. Now we look at the capital side. Who has the capital? It's the City of London and Wall Street. Both of them have been basically running the world. And of course, the West is far ahead for a long time in enterprise, entrepreneurship, and branding. All these names, people fight over it. People spend money on it. In Nepal and Indonesia, people go on riots because the elites of those countries were flaunting their wealth. But actually, in the past few months, we all realized that actually all these things were probably, most of them were made in China. And so and the branding has tricked a lot of us into paying high prices for basically the same thing we could buy from China. Now we put all these factors of production together. Capital from the US, enterprise, entrepreneurship from Europe, okay? And then comes from Russia, resources, natural resources, and of course, labor, cheap labor, all comes from China. So the idea is for these two groups of people to dominate the world and dominate all the resources and the labor. That's what's been happening maybe since after the Second World War. The benefits of imperialism or neo-colonialization. Residents in those countries, cradle to grave welfare. They all had made a lot of money, and even when they had their pension, they could retire. Now, of course, things are different. Most of the US empire countries are very deeply in debt, and the banks are even in a very bad shape. Before I proceed, I must sort of go back a bit. How do banks work? They lend you money, but you give them collateral. So you give them your house, you get a mortgage, you get overdraft, whatever. That's how it works. Now, how do governments work? Governments work about the same way. They sell you bonds because they need the money to spend on everything. And they give you bonds and return money to you in time to come. Now, what's the collateral? Usually, people like stable currencies. And of course, economies are good. If I buy US bonds, I get US dollars in the end. But US dollars will be useful to me if I can use the US dollars to buy things in the US or anywhere in the world. But once inflation and high interest rates comes in, as a bond investor, I get frightened and I think twice about buying US bonds. So for homeowners, the house is a collateral. For governments, their strong economy is their collateral. When our house value drops, what happens? The bank will give you a margin call and say, please top up. If you're lucky enough and you get suddenly an inherited house or another house, then of course you could give the deed to the bank and say, look, I've got a new asset. I can use it to borrow more money. That's how the bank works. For Western banks, they're all stretched out. They are in deep trouble. They should be getting margin calls, but they are not because the system protects them. Now, let's go back to the Ukraine conflict. It is actually an opportunity to seize Russian assets for the Western banks. The Western banks are in trouble. They need more collateral. So Russia has a lot of assets, a lot of resources. Using Ukraine to fight Russia is a way of getting Russian resources. It's the same with Taiwan. Taiwan is the key to seizing China's assets for collateral for Western banks. Now, Trump inherited all these neocon problems. The empire overspent, and as a result, the US has deindustrialized, and now de-dollarization is a threat coming from the BRICS country. If nothing is done, it is almost certain by most accounts that the US empire will plunge into the abyss. The debt is $37 trillion, as we all know. Trump is, fortunately or unfortunately, not a neocon. He wants to revive the US colony, not the US empire. He doesn't see what the neocon sees. What he wants in his earlier writings is he wants a world with 3 spheres of influence. That means America, USA covers the American continent, Russia maybe covers European continent, and China covers the Asian part. And with these 3 spheres of influence, we don't bother each other. We become masters of our own spheres of influence. This view of Trump actually goes against the neocons, who think that USA or the US neocons should continue to dominate the world. But they have power. They have finance, media, and the military. The neocons, and Trump is not part of them, they are also the military-industrial complex and the deep state. If you trace them back, it's actually, you can trace them usually to the banking oligarchs. They are very smart. They control both sides of the political side, and they have immense power. And of course, they are profit-driven. Give example to underline this. Liz Truss, she was a PM for a short while. When she retired, she was interviewed. And she said that actually before she became PM, she wanted to reform the Bank of England. But when she became PM, she realized that the Bank of England actually told her what to do and not the other way around. So as a PM, she said she had no power. Same with Mark Carney. In an interview just after he stepped down, he said that actually banks have the power. If banks want to start green projects, they can just lend them money. If banks want to kill projects, let's say non-green projects, they can just withdraw the money. And history tells us that banks can change the course of history too. Okay? Give you an example. In 1904, Russia and Japan had a war. This guy, Takahashi Koreakyo, is from the Bank of Japan. He wanted to borrow money to fight the Russians, as represented by Tsar Nicholas II. He went to the West and nobody wanted to lend him money. But he came across a Jewish banker, Jacob Schiff, who hated 𝗏𝗏𝗧, okay? And so he decided to get all the Western banks to lend money to Japan. Of course, Japan eventually won the war, okay? Not that the bank loan is important, but it was $200 million then, which is a lot more money today. This guy, Jacob Schiff, later on lent money to the Bolsheviks, and these are the ones that involved in the Russian Revolution and overthrew Tsar Nicholas II. So it goes to show that money, banking loans can influence many things. If you're not part of the deep state, then of course they'll kill you. And this has happened in history. For Trump, they also tried to kill him about more than a year ago because he's not part of the deep state. Now, in today's talk, I'm going to tell you what Trump is trying to do. Again, this is what I think he's doing, or what I think if he's not doing, he should be doing. Like in the picture of the old woman and the young girl. Number one, US should retreat from empire because it's not benefiting the USA. In fact, a few days after Trump came to power, Marco Rubio mentioned this, that actually the US cannot be responsible for solving the world's problem. It's not normal to be the only superpower. And he says, why can't superpowers work together? And for Trump's inauguration, the European neocons were not invited. Again, this is telling. Trump realized that the British neocons, through MI6, had influenced the US neocons. Not people realize it, but actually London is a spiritual capital of Western hegemony, neocon. And Trump doesn't like them, and MI6 doesn't like him. Why did MI6 take this role? MI6 and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Britain. Probably the British Empire had reinvented itself to control the world through USA, through US military and US finance. In 2016, there was this Russiagate scandal whereby they said that Trump was supported by Russia. Now it's been proven that this is all wrong, and actually the British MI6 had a strong hand in creating Russiagate. In January 20, just after that, in January 20, just before Trump handed over to Biden, there was a fight between Iran and US. This Soleimani was killed, and the Iranian retaliated by bombing some air bases or some in the Middle East. And so that was the end of it. But because Trump was told by Pentagon that you cannot proceed, it is not difficult to beat Iran in the Middle East. UK's MI6 wanted Trump to continue, and Trump was very reluctant to go ahead with it, and so he refused. October last year, during the campaign, apparently UK Labour Party sent 100 people to America to canvass and to help Kamala Harris. Now, this is, of course, something which angered Trump. So these few examples prove or show to me that maybe MI6, the British Foreign Office, is the original neocon. It is behind all the conflicts that the US neocons have been waging for many years. To me, the Ukraine conflict seems to be clearly originated from Britain, because this war started in February, and 2 months later in April, there was this Istanbul agreement, and there was supposed to be peace. But Johnson, then the PM, flew over to Kiev and told Zelensky, you do not sign that deal. The question is, hey, this is supposed to be a US war, right? Why is a British official doing it? Shouldn't a US official be doing it? To me, maybe the Brits are behind it. It's not the US. If MI6 is truly behind what's happening in the neocon world, in this world, then the mask is truly off. Because for a long time, we've been told that people like Tony Blair, they have always given the impression that they will listen to what the US said and the British will follow. But if I'm right, actually it is the other way around. It is MI6 that's controlling the US neocon. Now the question is, why is it that US neocons don't mind being directed by the British MI6? Well, as for example, as a Hollywood director, producer, and some starlet trying to make it big. You know, they sometimes exchange favors so that the actors, actresses become famous. And so maybe MI6 had a deal with the US neocons. In return, you will have your super dollar and the super economy and the super military. Both benefit. To recap, the real Ukraine conflict, to my mind, is an attempt to acquire more collateral for the failing Western banking system. About 1 year ago, this plan to seize Russian resources took a bad turn. What happened? Ukraine defaulted on its bonds, about nearly $200 billion worth. This means that all the European banks that lend them money lost that amount of money. Britain and the Europeans were in panic mode. Now they cannot get hold of Russian resources, which is 75 trillion. But Ukraine resources, which is 12 trillion, became the second best. And so around January this year, 4 days before Trump became the president, Starmer quickly signed a deal with Ukraine. In exchange for $3 billion, Ukraine hand over its resources. This is what they call a 100-year deal. Why was the UK or the Europeans in such a hurry to do it? Because they believed that Trump wanted to bring peace. Trump also, maybe they don't want the resources to fall into American hands. See, all these years, the European view was that we must have a ceasefire, whereas the American and the Russian view is no, it is stop the war, peace deal. The Europeans want a ceasefire because a ceasefire means that you stop fighting for a while and everything remains the same. Zelensky is still in charge, and that gives an opportunity to tap Ukrainian resources. A peace deal means that the constitution in Ukraine must be corrected. That means Zelensky must be moved through a new election. And if Zelensky goes, then that deal with the Britain is no longer valid. Okay, now let's leave Europe and move to Middle East. How Middle East chaos fits into the neocons' grand scheme of things. Middle East has two great things going, a lot of oil, and it has that Suez Canal, which shortens a lot of trade between Europe and the East. The British, like all the other empires before them, has this perfect model, divide and conquer. And that's how they tried to rule the world. In 1917, the opportunity arose with the Balfour Declaration. Britain actually promised Palestine to three people, three different parties. By 1917, they gave it to Israel. And so Israel was born. Israel is like putting the cat among the pigeons, putting Jews among the middle of the Arab people. So create tension and chaos. What's the advantage of creating tension and chaos in the region? Very simple. When there's instability in a region, you sell arms to both sides. You make money. Also, there's a lot of oil in the Middle East, right? With all the chaos, Western oil companies can exploit all the resources there, and they have been doing that for years. Chaos in the Middle East also weaken any rivals to the US empire because the Middle East in the middle, oil supply, 47% of China's oil supply comes from Middle East, okay? And global oil supply, 26%. Of course, global trade goes through Red Sea, and that's 30%. If you control the Middle East, then you control basically the global economy. Again, it will jam Russia's INSTC. Now, to send anything from St. Petersburg to India, you go through Mediterranean Sea, Red Sea. So for a long time, Russia wanted to build a road or rail link right to India. But of course, this goes through Iran, and that's the conflict area. It will jam also China's Belt Road Initiative because it will go through, it has to go near the Middle East, and it will also jam China's BRI. It will also jam the development of BRICS because Middle East is a connection between Asia, Russia, and Africa. Israel's plans and the neocons' plans are in harmony because Israel has one plan for greater Israel. It means they want Israel to be not just this tiny little speck of land here, but this big blue area. Now, the Europeans support this. Why? Because they've always wanted to pipe Qatar, gas from Qatar and Iran all the way to Europe. At that time, it was either to go through Jordan, Syria, Iraq, or Iran. Of course, these are enemies of Europe. And when Russia cut off its oil to Germany and Europe in 2022, plan gained more prominence. And so in September 2023, Israel came out with this plan to link not through Turkey, but through this part of the Mediterranean, that's Palestine. This route goes to Palestine. So basically, Israel would like Palestine to disappear. Not only that, there are supposed to be a lot of oil and gas resources off the coast of Palestine. And that will be a bonus to Israel if you can get the Palestinians to go away. This view has been undermined because in May this year, the leader of Conservative Party said that Ukraine is fighting a proxy war on behalf of Western Europe. And she also said that Israel is fighting a proxy war on behalf of the UK. So that fortifies my belief. The British Empire is probably the best in Sichuan opera face changing. I say this because in the 18th century, UK signed numerous treaties with everyone, and they backed both sides in a fight against each other. And in those days, the Europeans labeled Britain's treachery and labeled as the perfidious Albion. Albion is an ancient word for Britain. And there have been many books written about Britain's treachery. Today, MI6 is still stirring the pot. In the past 2 months, it signed defense agreements with Kazakhstan and Armenia. Now, of course, why? Because Kazakhstan is next to Russia. Armenia is also next to Russia. Now, I want to point something out. Armenia is next to Turkey. Britain also supports Turkey's idea of Grand Turan. This Erdogan and some Turkish people believe that Turkey should reclaim that ancient Turkic land. And this idea also supports the destruction of Armenia because Turks don't like Armenians. And so again, Britain has put itself between two opposition parties. Now, why is Britain doing this? In the competition between two men for a fair lady, it is understandable we use every resources we have. So if the short man use all his cunning to secure the girl, we shouldn't blame them, right? So we shouldn't blame the British, who are short on natural resources, to use all their cunning to secure their place in the world. Against this background, what has Trump done in the Middle East to bring about peace? First of all, Trump has inherited this neocon plan to take out 7 countries. This was planned long before September 11, 2001, exactly 24 years ago, because these 7 countries are rich in resources. They have taken down Iraq, Libya, and Syria. The last one is Iran. And so it has fallen on Trump to take out Iran. Now, the neocons have this against Iran. Iran cannot have a nuclear program. Trump has took advantage of this view of the neocons. What he has done is in June, he had this Operation Midnight Hammer, whereby he bombed so-called Iran's nuclear sites. Remember, he kept on saying all the nuclear sites have been bombed. By saying that, he has taken away the neocons' reason for fighting Iran. So in a sense, he's quite smart. He used that to stop the war. On the surface, US and Iran are still in conflict, but actually they are not doing much to each other because US knows that you really can't take on Iran. Iran has backing Russia and China. So Trump has upset the neocons' plans for war in the Middle East, even though Israel is still trying to restart the conflict. As we know, a few days ago, he attacked Qatar. But ultimately, Israel is the loser here. His enemies are still there. Reservists, Israeli IDF reservists are stretched. People are getting out, no inward investment. And actually the Iran-Israel war sort of demonstrated that actually Iran has an edge over Israel. Now let's move to Europe. What has Trump done to bring about peace in Europe? Using his tariffs, he has bullied Europe. This was a meeting in Scotland this year, and whereby Trump imposed on Europeans that you must buy weapons for his Ukraine war, reduce the tariffs to 15%, and Europe must buy $750 billion worth of US energy products. And EU is supposed to invest $600 billion in US. The most important meeting was the one between Trump and Putin. They met in Alaska, as we all know, and there were many deals done, but not all of it were disclosed. Basically, Europe will not have the backing of US hardware. If Europe wants to fight Russia, it will have to buy arms from the US. Basically, there will be peace, not a ceasefire. I think Putin knows the problems facing Trump because in a press conference after that, Putin said that let's hope our agreement goes away, provided Brussels and Kiev don't try to sabotage our talks. Immediately after this meeting in Alaska, the European leaders went over to Washington and to try to discuss with Trump to get not peace deal, but a ceasefire. One interesting thing which I noticed, Zelensky was with them as well. Zelensky met Trump before Trump met all the European leaders. And at the end of the meeting with Trump, Zelensky was smiling away. Now, this gave me the impression that probably in the meeting Trump had with Putin, they have agreed that, okay, we will give Zelensky a free pass. We will not kill him. And Trump must have told Zelensky, and that's why he's very happy now that he's got a chance to live in all his bungalows all over the world. Another thing which has been happening, which actually happened in July, but we only learned in August, all discussions, peace discussion between US and Russia will not be given to the Five Eyes. This Five Eyes alliance started right after the Second World War. And now Trump has told the Five Eyes, I'm not telling you what was discussed. This is quite a break. Secondly, Antony Blinken in August and 37 other former officials of Biden, they lost their security clearance, which means to say they cannot go in and look at the files or talk to people. They no longer know what's happening in Trump's admin. So from what I see, Trump is slowly cutting off the neocons because basically, practically, economic cooperation between Russia and China and Russia and USA makes more sense because US can help Russia to exploit all its $75 trillion worth of resources. A war, what's the point? One of the talks probably discussed is the Bering Strait Peace Tunnel. This has been brought up in 1905 by Tsar Nicholas II and was brought up again in 1945 by Truman, but Churchill pushed it down. And actually Putin also brought it up in the late 1990s because there is some economic sense. If you connect Russia with Alaska, which is USA, it will be a new ball game altogether. Why did Britain poo-poo the idea? Because right now, Europe is in the middle of this world, the center of the world. If there's a Bering Strait, the Pacific Ocean will be the center of the world, and Europe will suddenly be at the extreme end. Maybe that's what they don't want. After the victory parade, China and Russia also signed a deal to start the power of Siberia to. This is a new pipeline from Yamal across Mongolia to China. And this will divert all the gas which Russia had earmarked for Europe. So if this deal, they'll start building the pipeline. It'll happen in a few years' time. No matter what, there'll be no more gas for Europe, which means high energy prices, cut off from the world. There'll be economic hardship. Economic hardship will normally lead to wars, and wars are useful. Leaders who can blame the war with Russia, it's the cause of all the shortages in Europe. And of course, when people do not have the things that they want, they will start revolution. But wars prevent that because all the young men are sent to their deaths to fight against the enemies. So wars are useful in that sense. A mini dark ages for Europe could return, whereby people concentrate on basic necessities. And this is what I fear is going to happen to Europe. It will be sidelined. I said mini because the dark ages went for a few hundred years. It's mini because in time to come, there'll be new governments in India, in Germany, Britain, and France, and they'll be practical and try to work with Russia again and get cheap gas again. Russia might find new sources of gas fields in Russia. As far as Europe is concerned, Trump is also keeping the USA away from the war in Europe. Of course, as it is now, the European governments are preparing for war with Russia. They have to, they got no choice. Now let's move to China. What has Trump done for China? This is the US neocons obsession, and Trump can now focus on Russia. When he became president, he brought in this guy called 𝗵𝗲 𝗧𝗐𝗫. He's one hell of a hawk. He wrote a book in 2021 stating that you can defeat China in a limited war. And because of him, there have been many seminars and conferences that talk about how to take China in a war. 𝗧𝗐𝗫, this guy, is the equivalent of Victoria Nuland, this anti-Russia hawk engineer that created the war against, or the main one, against Russia. That's her today. If you are a religious man or a medical man, you probably know that all that toxin and hatred for another person or race is actually bad for your health. It can change your personality, even change your looks. This is Victoria Nuland long ago when she was young. What a big difference. So all the hatred for Russia must have changed her physical appearance. Now, if there's a war between US and China, who will win? All the war games and all the military hardware paraded out seems to say that probably US will lose. A few days ago in the victory parade, China showed all its military hardware, all the hardware which the West hasn't got, or only still developing. Of course, the Western critics will say, oh, these are all shows. Maybe it doesn't work. That's possible. China is also equally capable of throwing up propaganda. But the 4-day war between India and Pakistan using Chinese planes showed that, Chinese planes or military equipment can be equal or not better than Western planes. And the 12-day war between Iran and Israel in June also showed that the Western missile defense systems actually can be overcome by Iran's missiles. Russia and China's missiles are slightly better than Iran's missile. If Iran can hit Israel, Russia and China could do that too. The other thing, because of the rare earth shortages, which China is not selling to the US, this has limited US military's ability to wage war. They are short of missiles, short of a lot of materials to make all the new planes and missile warhead. Realistically, Trump should work with Xi Jinping, but he has his hands tied because a lot of people in Congress are anti-China. So he has to work on it. But I believe that Trump has some tools at his disposal. The MIC will definitely try and stop Trump, probably try to kill him. Okay? But Trump has a newfound advantage. China has stopped selling rare earths to US. That means all the MIC factories are now coming to a halt. They don't have the rare earths. They cannot. Trump could tell the MIC, look, if this continues, your factories will close, or your company will collapse. But if we become friendly with China, China may allow us some more rare earth, then your factories will not collapse. So this is a Trump card which Trump can use. Trump's bully tariffs have actually pushed India towards China. Many say that, oh, no, Trump made a mistake. Biden put Russia and China together. And now Trump, pushing China and India together. But let's look at it on the bright side. I just wondered whether Trump knows this. When you push India towards China, you're actually weakening. Quad is these 4 countries that are supposed to fight China. And if there's any fight, a war with China, India has to supply 1.2 million soldiers. If India is out, there's basically no more fight. Japan and Australia hasn't got enough soldiers to fight China. In July, William Lai wanted to visit New York. Apparently, Trump told him, don't come. This was revealed a few days ago. And let's back to 𝗘𝗿. 𝗘𝗿, the guy who came out with an anti-China strategy. A few days ago, he came out with a new strategy for China. And it's not to defeat China, but the new strategy is to maybe the US Pentagon should look after the homeland rather than the China threat. This is actually a 180 degrees turn. That means maybe 𝗘𝗿 has finally acknowledged that you can't win a war against China. So it appears that Trump could be undermining the US neocons' plans for war with China. In the Middle East, he sort of bring about peace. In Europe, some sort of peace. And in the Asia Pacific, some sort of peace. And that's wonderful. It's actually good news I'm telling you today. Or I tried to tell you that I'm seeing a young girl rather than an old lady in the picture. That's retreat from empire. The other one is revive the US economy. The tariff principle is good, but execution is bad. Maybe it's got lousy people. The tariffs is like a diver jumping in a shallow pool. He gets a big bump on his head. Okay, they're underestimated. But look at it another way. This is, again, I'm trying to be positive about it. Wait, let's look at disaster first. It's a disaster because if you want to have tariffs, you must have some policies to get US businesses to start factories to substitute all the imports. But nothing like this was done. Okay, now I try to look at the good side. Trump used a tariff because it's the easiest weapon he has in hand. It is now considered illegal, and they are going to prove through a long process, starting with the first meeting in November, that the tariffs are illegal and Trump should withdraw it. But that's November. It takes a few more months before they come back and tell Trump that using Congress is legal. But tariff is the only weapon that Trump has to use. Trump used or could use tariff, but he used it to bully others. Maybe that's his opening style. And surprisingly, there are some benefits. For instance, he used his tariffs to bully everyone. And over the course of the past 8 months, a lot of countries have said that, okay, they will invest in USA. Of course, that's what they say. When Trump steps out, they might not do it, but that's the positive effect of his bully tariffs. And another agreement, which is not highlighted in Alaska, is that the European confiscated about $300 billion worth of Russian assets. Trump and Putin has probably agreed that let's move the $300 billion to USA. So again, the Europeans are in really bad state if $300 billion have to be removed then from the banking system. Anyway, besides this, Trump could easily reverse. Trump could reverse it even before the Congress ruled it as illegal. But he will do it if and when his idea of a 3 spheres of influence is realized. Remember I told you earlier in the lecture, he wants to control America, let Russia maybe control Europe, China controls Asia Pacific. And if that happens, we get peace and global trade will be boosted. And of course, with global peace, Trump will probably get his peace prize. With his peace prize, he'll probably reverse his tariff. There's an attempt to de-dollarize. Okay, this came out really after the Ukraine Russian war started, because everyone realized that how do you counter the US empire? They sanction you, they weaponize the US dollar, and they realize that, oh, many people realized long before, the strength of US empire is based on US dollar because they can print the money and pay for US military. Okay? If you can de-dollarize, that means nobody uses the US dollar, then the collapse of US empire will happen. And so in October last year, BRICS agreed to come out with a new currency. A few days ago, SCO also agreed to help out with the BRICS to come out with this new currency. On paper, they say that members' fiat currencies will be used to come out with this new BRICS currency. But I've always mentioned before, the practical effect is to use gold. It's the ideal base for any new currency. But not all countries have gold. They have palm oil, they have rubber, they have everything else. One way is to have a commodity exchange whereby you tie the price of palm oil to gold, copper, everything to gold. Because right now, the commodity markets are controlled by Chicago and London, and a lot of people think that they are manipulating the price. It's just been announced in July that Russia will start its own physical gold exchange at the end of this year. Russia even right now, can depend its gold price on London and Chicago. Now, with this new exchange, St. Petersburg, Russia can price the price of gold with all other commodities, and so can a lot of other global south countries. It basically sets the stage for a BRICS currency. Progress on the BRICS currency has faced many delays because India seems to be opposing it along the way. Maybe that's because of the India-China rivalry, and India's belief that, hey, we should use more of the rupee rather than other currencies. But because of these delays, actually China has pushed ahead in about March this year to expand its gold trading system. Right now, there's one gold trading market in Shanghai. That means if you buy or sell gold, you have to deliver or collect physical gold. China, in March, has agreed to open 6 more exchanges globally. That means one in Hong Kong and one in Riyadh. That means if you got renminbi, you can go to Riyadh, buy gold, and collect gold. So basically, this is actually creating a new gold standard. This is China's defense against the collapse of the Western fiat currencies, because when US dollar collapse and everything else, all the Chinese renminbi can collapse as well. But if you can tell people, look, your renminbi can be exchanged for gold, basically Chinese renminbi is already on gold standard. The question is, how high can the price of gold rise? I've been telling people to buy gold since 2020, about 5 years ago. And people say, oh, because gold used to be $300 many years ago. So they say it's crazy, price cannot go up. And even just 2 weeks ago when it was 3,003, I tell people to buy gold. I say, no, how can it's crazy, it's high. Let me tell you why I think it'll go up. The price of gold should be measured using all the domestic currency printed, divide the amount of gold holdings you have. Now, China has equivalent to $15 trillion of M1. The US has about $18 trillion worth of M1. How much gold has the US have? 8,000 tons or 286 million ounces. And China has, on paper, about 2,000 tons. But a lot of people think that China has 20 to 36,000 tons of gold. So using the formula which I gave you earlier, the US price of gold for US dollars is actually $66,000. Price of gold for Chinese renminbi, if you take 2,000 tons, is $192,000 per ounce. If you use 20,000 tons, price of gold in China will be $22,000 per ounce. And this takes into account today's exchange rate, right? When US dollar crashes, so that's the target. Let's say maybe about 20,000. That's maybe a bit too much. 10,000 US dollars an ounce. That's how I see gold price going. No matter what, BRICS must go ahead with their new currency. because there's no guarantee that the US neocons, after Trump goes, will not start attacking BRICS and China and Russia again, even if Trump succeeds in forging peace. What's the best way of saving the dollar? Of course, the old way is to attack Russia and China, defeat them, and make renminbi and rubles illegal. So they all have to work to get US dollars, and that saves the US dollar. And now, one of Trump's claims is to take over Greenland. Greenland has only for about 50,000 people. He can easily send US troops and kill everyone there. Greenland is basically Denmark, but Denmark is a European country and it can be easily bullied. Why Greenland? Greenland has $70 trillion worth of natural resources. US has national debt of 37 trillion. If you take over Greenland, your debt is good. Okay, a lot of people say this is a far-fetched idea. But no, the US is working on it. Just a few days ago, US officials were caught trying to get Greenlanders to succeed, move away from Denmark and join USA. And this Mark Stroh, the deputy chief of the US embassy in Denmark, was called into Denmark and given a scolding. So the US is still working on Greenland. Of course, the other thing which could save the US dollar is Bitcoin using crypto. I mentioned before, Bitcoin is a virtual currency. If you monopolize Bitcoin, you push it up to $1 million per coin, then you make it legal tender. That means all your $1 million worth of treasury, I give you one Bitcoin. So that's one way of saving the US dollars too. The latest thing is this Genius Act. This passed in July. It is to legalize and regulate the use of stablecoin. What's a stablecoin? It's a cryptocurrency that has a backing of a known asset. Let me explain. Right now, how do you send money to, let's say from Singapore to Hong Kong? You change your Sing dollar to US dollar through a US bank and you go through SWIFT. These two steps can be stopped by the US authorities. Okay? You use SWIFT, you use US banks. But in the past 2 years, stablecoin has become very popular. Stablecoin is different. You change your Hong Kong dollar into one tether, and then you go by cryptocurrency, you send to your friend in Hong Kong, and she will change that stablecoin or Hong Kong dollar. So you bypass SWIFT, you bypass the US dollar. Tether has been so popular in the past 2 years, right? That I think the daily transaction is more than Visa and MasterCard combined together. The trouble is Tether is a private company. And although it promises that every Tether will be backed by every US dollar, some people don't trust them because they could be a scam in it. So don't hold Tether. Use it to send money to wherever you want to. Now, Genius Act came in because Trump wants to legalize stablecoin. That means now Tether has to be controlled by the US authorities. Some people think that this act actually means that a lot more people will use stable coins, and that will mean that they have to buy either treasuries or acquire US dollars, and that will save the US dollars. There is some truth to this thinking, because if you look at it, 50% of global payments use the US dollar. 58% of global exchange reserves use US dollar, but 99% of stable coins use US dollar. So it is probably their hope that by legalizing it, more people will hold US dollar, and it actually checks de-dollarization. But I don't think so. I don't think so because now the US stablecoin will be tightly regulated. It can be tracked and your usage can be controlled. So basically, it's back to the old SWIFT US bank system, and nobody likes that. And even if people want to use US dollar because its stable coin is useful, they don't trust it. They will use it for the transaction, but they won't invest in it. Okay, so let's recap Trump's 3 moves. Retreat from empire. If successful, it will keep the USA within the top 3 category and it'll be good for the world. There'll be peace and global trade will be revived. Reviving the US economy, I think the tariff is a disaster. It'll take time, but at least his bully tariffs have helped his geopolitical maneuver. The last one, defend the US dollar. I don't think it'll be successful unless it invades Greenland and seize Greenland, because the BRICS currency is going ahead. And even if peace comes, the three spheres of influence, US or dollar will no longer be number one, but it will still be probably a major currency. What can stop Trump from getting USA, China, and Russia together? They could probably kill him. That's what they probably try to do. The other thing which has been brought up is that maybe the Einstein files could be his downfall, because Trump supposed to release it but didn't. So the rumor is that maybe he's guilty of tendencies. His wife is supposed to be introduced by Epstein to Trump, but at least he married her. Can't be that bad. Why didn't he release the files? I think that it can also be a very useful, powerful tool for Trump, because there are many people there who are now could be blackmailed. So Trump probably told them, say, look, Mr. A, I got in my files that you are a pedophile. You have always criticized me. Now, if you continue to criticize me, I'm going to release it and then you end up in jail. So actually, you notice a lot of the critics against Trump has stopped recently. Obama, Nancy Pelosi, they all suddenly kept quiet. And it also shows John Bolton used to be supposed to be a buddy of Trump. Now he got him arrested. See, Trump is playing the Sichuan opera face-changing routine. He's friends with him, and now he's no longer useful. He has removed him from some keeping or revealing some classified files. And just strangely, in August, he threatened to arrest George Soros and his son. Hello, this is the banking oligarch. No one has touched him like this before, and now Trump threatened to arrest him. He must have something up his sleeve which Soros is afraid of. And lastly, now he's going after the big pharma. He was the one who introduced COVID, but now he's going after them. Maybe think that Trump is mad and doing all the wrong things. What I'm saying is that this past hour, he may be trying and succeeding to undermine the neocons. Of course, his aim is to have three spheres of influence. If he's successful, the losers will be Europe, Israel, and some nations in the American continent who will be under the purview of the US military. The winners will be USA, Russia, China, and the global. But if he is not successful, if he fails, and of course, BRICS, I believe, will continue his new currency, the losers will be USA, Europe, and Israel. And the winners will be Russia, China, and the global south. Remember, this is just my view. You all see a young girl, or you all see an old lady. I see a young girl. But of course, it doesn't mean I 100% believe in what I told you tonight. I'm not sure, basically. I'll give it a confidence interval of maybe 60-70% that I might be right. Thank you, everyone. This is the end of my talk.